Okay, so we're gonna jump in and get started. A couple notes. We're good with microphones on and all that. If at any point you have any questions or want some background information on some of the terms that we're using or some examples that we're taking a look at, definitely feel free to drop a message in the chat. And also, I want to make sure that we have some space for some questions if there are some. So I'll get into some kind of business goal fundamentals and then jump into a template that I'm currently working on that you all will have access to for free. What we're covering today, when it comes to goals, we're focusing on the OKR model. This is a model that kind of started in IBM and Google popularized it quite a bit, I think in the early 2000s, but it's 40, 50-year-old methodology that essentially takes big goals related to businesses and organizations and breaks them down into more tangible, quantifiable areas to track, and specifically having some data around what are the things that are going to get us toward that goal. It's really just a methodology of trying to get more specific and get more quantifiable with the goals that we're setting. And in contrast to a big set of annual goals, the model is quarterly, which it doesn't necessarily have to be on a quarterly basis, but quarters have been the most popular way to at least 4 times a year. You do have the opportunity to reflect on how you performed across key results. And that kind of data is meant to inform future quarters and get better in the process. We have an exercise that's hopefully helping get from that big mission vision area down into the nitty gritty of key results. So I'll also share that in a bit. And then we'll jump into the template, which I'll also share the link for, to talk a little bit about some of the big features to come out from Notion over the past couple of months and how that's helped really streamline and simplify databases. So very excited about some of that stuff. And then we'll have time for some Q&A. Cool. So if we haven't connected before, my name's Dave. As I might have mentioned earlier, but I'm a certified Notion consultant. And I've been working solely with Notion clients for about 2 years now. Before that was in education, worked with middle school, high school students teaching computer science. And way before that, practiced and worked in architecture. It's definitely been a whirlwind of a professional path, but really been fun and exciting to be in the Notion space, and really got started making YouTube videos and just sharing tutorials on what the things were that I was working on. So that just led to workshops and projects and build projects, things like that, doing that full time. And the goal framework that we're talking about today is actually something I've used with a couple clients currently in terms of getting up and running and leading training for those teams. A little bit about me. And as I mentioned, been doing this focus on operations for about 2 years now, and got to work with a variety of teams and organizations in tech, in academia. So it's been a pretty awesome experience so far. Okay, want to get into OKRs, just like a quick level of 1 to 5 in the chat. Level 1 being I've never heard of OKRs, and 5 being I've read on it, I've practiced it. But where's everybody at in terms of OKRs? So 1, very little prior knowledge, and 5, you've definitely used them or applied them or learned about them in the past. Thanks, Rachel. All right, so you got some familiarity. Darren, thank you. Cool. So a little mixture, but we've definitely got some experience with it. So I'll probably jump over the kind of 101 stuff and get into specifics of what this looks like in Notion. OKRs, this is essentially a way to track our progress toward our goals that we're setting up as a company. So even if you're a company of 1 or a very small team, I just made my first hire 3 weeks ago. So that's surprisingly been a lot of changes in terms of workflows and trying to document the things that I'm doing day to day. But regardless of the size of your company or business, OKRs can be really helpful to get more formal understanding of where you want to be 3 months from now and what are the things that you're going to do to make progress toward those goals. When we get into the differences between objectives and key results, this comes up quite a bit for larger teams where we might have some employees who've used it before or seen OKRs and other employees who have not. So the big difference is when we create objectives, we don't necessarily have to have all of the data and metrics in mind yet. These are really just thinking a little bit zoomed out. Where do we want to be 3 months from now? And how does this relate to our larger company or business vision? When we're at the start of a quarter, writing down what are the things that we want to have accomplished by the end of the 3 months? And it could be related to growing your business. It could be related to improving relationships with customers or potential customers, things like that. Objectives can and should run the gamut of different areas of your business, and they will look quite different depending on the area of the business that you're focusing on. So when we think about objectives that way, as like, where do we want to be in 3 months? The key results are the specifics around each objective in terms of the things that you're going to quantify to get there. So it could be completion of a set of projects. It could be publishing X amount of pieces of content over the course of that 3 months. So key results also could be number of things that are created. It could be improving percentages. It could be decreasing time. So the units could vary quite a bit, right? So there's also ways to account for that. But essentially, we want a number that we can track and update weekly so that we can, at the end of a quarter, see how we performed across objectives. And then if you're just joining us, we just jumped in. Yeah, welcome. Great to see you. Okay, so quick update on OKRs, a quick overview. Also important to know what OKRs are not. So if you have worked with or have been in a company that have used KPIs, big difference here is KPIs, which are key performance indicators, are really things that should be tracked pretty consistently, regardless of the objectives that are set up. So things like, if social media is an important part of your business, tracking followers or tracking number of views, if you're creating YouTube videos, things like that, those metrics that you really want to have a regular understanding for on a regular basis weekly, those would be considered KPIs. So there might be some data that you are tracking evergreen, which is all the time, that may fit into an objective, but maybe not. So there's some overlap in there, but not quite the same thing. Also, if you're part of a larger team, OKRs are definitely not a way to micromanage. This could, if it's a very top-down setup or framework, this could very much turn into micromanaging of every team member now has to do work toward a key result. So if you're part of a larger team, there's definitely a lot of big benefits of getting everybody involved and collaborating on the process of what are the goals that we want to accomplish as an organization. And also the template that we're going to be looking at is based on quarter, but you're not necessarily required to use the quarterly framework. It's just a starting point. And I typically recommend for clients that are getting up and running with OKRs to start at the quarterly level, because it just gets everybody in sync. You remove the variable of some teams have KRs for the month and some teams have it for 6 weeks. So after a couple quarters of using OKRs, then that's a good opportunity to say, all right, maybe December is a big month, making a big push towards a launch or towards a big milestone. So you might set up an objective and key results for that 1 month period, for example. But starting with a quarter is typically a good way to go. All right. Okay, so next we're going to switch gears. Big change from, say, a year ago, because I did run and launch a course on goals, specifically managing them in Notion. So a big change that has really simplified this whole process has been the addition of sub items as a feature. So this allows you to nest pages within other pages in a database. So quick yes or no if you've explored sub items in Notion, or if this is brand new. But this is really meant that, for example, previously you might have databases for goals, for objectives, for key results, and then have to relate them all together. Now it's a lot easier to consolidate everything into one database. So that's what we're going to get into next. I'm going to share a couple links with you all, and you could follow along, or you could watch me doing it or do it simultaneously, but I'll also be recording this and then editing it and then sharing it with everybody who RSVP'd, so you could always recap on the live session. So let's drop this link into the chat. And this will open up a page that we're going to be looking at. So let me open it on, and I'll share my screen too, so you can see what we're covering. So if you want to get the link, duplicate it to your Notion workspace, you can do that. We'll take a few moments if you do want to do that. And then otherwise, we'll jump into the template, how it works, and specifically the guide that's included in there to help you go from that big vision area down to the key results. So, and then while we're doing that, if anybody has any questions or comments, definitely let me know in the chat. Happy to address those. And then we'll also have time at the end for some Q&A. Or a couple of things about this template. It's like technically still in development because it's part of a larger course that I'm working on and launching in August. But it's the biggest difference, as I mentioned earlier, was that it's really using less databases. There's really only two. There's the goals database and a teams database, and then really organizing everything within those. A couple of things are there's a demo version of this template with filled in content around goals. So if we were to open this up, we could see here demo key results across different teams, really just filled in. This probably looks super overwhelming at this point, but if you do want to dive into these specific different views with real content, sometimes it's easier to follow when you can see like real data or real information and how it's organized and how the different views are set up. But if you're curious, you can definitely jump into that. But these are the main goals, or I'm sorry, the main views that we're going to be focusing on that each do a slightly different thing related to the same database. So definitely check that out if you're curious. And then teams, this is very simple. This is just a way to group goal information by team. So if you have a larger business or organization, this plays a bigger role. For me, for example, which is have myself, a couple contractors and an assistant, the teams are a lot smaller, right? It's client work, it's operations and content creation. This may look very different for you based on the type of work that you're doing. Okay, this is the area that I want to focus on, which is the template, which includes the databases and specifically this goal setup guide. So if we open up the setup guide, so again, this is something that you could duplicate into your workspace and use and customize. I'm going to work in a copy of this so that I don't mess with the template. So I'm going to open this up here. And this is a version of an exercise that I do with clients that are setting up OKRs, specifically with like operations teams. And this is really just meant to guide you along the process. Benefit of doing this in Notion is that we can incorporate linked views of databases so that as you're adding information, you're adding it to the database rather than do this exercise and then move to the database and then plug in all that information. You could do it in the guide and you're also populating all that information in the goals database. First area, this doesn't live in the goals database, but it's definitely an important part of OKRs. So if you're an entrepreneur, solopreneur, you're running a small team, starting with that mission and vision, this could be a whole webinar in and of itself, but starting with these areas, really just make sure that the goals that you're creating are tied to a bigger picture vision of where you want the company or your business to get to. And this is really not as time bound. It's really more aspirational statements to work toward. So you're not really getting into the nitty gritty details of what you're going to do to get there, but is really just acting as North Stars for the goals that you're going to set up. Within each part of the exercise, you do have a little extra context. Again, if you're diving deeper or if you need a refresher on setting up a mission or vision, or you're just getting started and are getting a comprehensive overview of what are some best practices of setting these up, these little toggles have more information in them in terms of what makes a good mission statement and what makes a good vision statement, things like that. And then there's also examples, right? So examples may or may not be super relevant based on your business, but definitely want to have an example in there so you could get an idea what this looks like. This is a version of something that I made, but I'm just going to drop this in here. Mission, what's the big goal of the company? Why does it exist? Who are we working for? Or who are we helping as an organization? And then the vision is really just what you want the organization to do and what you want it to maybe be remembered by. Again, examples, but the idea here would be that we would fill in these mission and vision statements so that for a refresher, if you've already done it, you can plug that in here. And then if you haven't gone through the exercise, it's a great starting point to get the wheels turning in terms of what you want to prioritize when you do get into setting up OKRs. How are we doing so far? Questions, comments on the mission vision side before I jump ahead a little bit? Okay, cool. Okay, so next up, this is now getting into the Teams database. Again, you might have, this is modeled based on a typical technology startup hierarchy, but if any of these are not really applicable to your business, definitely feel free to delete them or edit what exactly we're organizing in this Teams database. So for example, there's a quick checklist here. So if I'm going based off of my business, there's definitely content creation, client work. There is sales. There's quite a bit of overlap between content creation and marketing for me. So I would leave that unchecked. And then there's definitely some operations work. This is just meant to be a quick review of what teams are most relevant to you. So if I have, in this case, these four, what I'm going to do is get rid of the teams that are not relevant for my business. So I got rid of products, keep operations, and then I'm going to go ahead and add content creation. And then I'm going to add, and then in the teams, there's just like a quick template to give it the icon if you're aesthetic obsessive like I am. But we've got these four teams in this case. What this is going to allow us to do is group OKR data by team. So if you're plugging in data weekly, it breaks it down into smaller groups so that you're not having to update 10 or 20 different key results metrics. And it just allows to group in unique ways and make it more digestible, basically. So from there, we've got our teams. If there's any that are not in this list, all you got to do is click new and then add a new team. And this is already connected to your goals database. So from there, we're getting into goals. So this is the top level of the database. So if we think about it as nesting, we've got three levels: goal, objective, which in this case is quarterly, and then key results, which are metrics that you're quantifying per each objective. So in this case, these are where do you want to be in anywhere from 1 to 3 years. Again, there's some tips in terms of how to write goals that are most effective to the business. And from there, there's also a few examples here that are related to management or business consulting. So what I'm going to do is drop one of these in here, become a global leader in strategic advisory services. I'm going to add that into this section. And then now I've got that as a goal here. One other thing to keep in mind is for goals and for the exercise specifically, this is automatically set up to show, give me 1 second. Close this part. So if we dive into the database view a little bit, this is automatically showing goals by default. So whenever I create a new addition here, it's automatically tying it as a goal. So if I open up this new one that I just added, I could see here that it's tagged as a goal type. And then from here, if you have different team members, you can apply them to own a goal or objective. But we're not really editing like the metrics yet, because this is, again, a high level goal. We're going to get into that in the key results. So from here, 1 to 3 years, where do we want the business to go or to be in that time frame? And again, we don't have to get super detailed or super quantified at this point. This is really just the starting point for defining objectives. So from there, the next section we have is objectives. So like I mentioned, I typically recommend to start at the quarterly time frame. This is mainly just to avoid objectives that are for the month of July, and then other objectives are for the second half of the year. It's just less mental energy we need to exert on like the timeframes for objectives, at least for a couple quarters while we're getting comfortable with the OKR framework. If we say these objectives are for Q3, that means that the start date is July 1st. to up until September 30th. That's the timeline. And there's a couple filters set up to automatically show the current OKRs. From here, you'll notice that there's a toggle, and we've got, if we're looking at the mountain icon, that's a goal. If we're looking at the bullseye, that's an objective. And then if we're looking at this graph, those are key results. So if I were to open this example, building a robust audience is a long-term goal. An objective that's for this quarter is build a habit of weekly content creation. And then key results there are publishing a weekly email newsletter. So that would be roughly 12 for the quarter, and publish 6 YouTube videos. So if I were to open up this email newsletter one, this is where we get into specifics around the key result. So you can see here, there's a current value, a target value, and let's rearrange that, starting, current, and target. And then there's a progress bar to just quickly see where we at throughout the quarter as a quick visual reminder. And then when we get into the GYR, which is green, yellow, red, this is really just a visual marker to see where we in terms of progress. And it's a formula that's really just saying if we're above 70%, we're in the green. If we're between 40 and 70%, we're in the yellow, and then below 40%, we're in the red. So again, just like a small tool that could go a long way when we're looking at multiple key results. But I'm getting ahead of myself because we are setting up objectives. So if we look at the become a global leader in strategic advisory services, I'm going to add an objective here. So we'll say launch a Notion consultants course. And then here you'll see that there's 2 properties that are visible in this list view. So difficulty, there's 2 levels here, standard and then aspirational. So essentially, we want to have a balance of goals that we feel like we need to hit, which are standard, and then at least a few aspirational goals, meaning they're stretch goals, they're highly ambitious, but they're going to push us past our norm to make progress in our business. So we'll say that's aspirational. And then if it's part of a team, we're going to call this, doesn't quite fit into any of these. So I'm going to say training, just quickly add a new team here. And then open that to apply the team template and then go back. So let's head back down to where we were. So I've got this objective here, and we know that it's an objective because it's got the little bullseye icon. And now we've got key results. How are we going to measure our progress, and how are we going to know if we met our objective at the end of the quarter? So in this case, you could say that the objective of launching a course is you're going from 0 to 1, pretty basic. But if we dive a little bit deeper, there's a lot of details in that process that are going to affect our success in that objective. So if we open up, or if I, again, with key results, we've got some tips on key results that we won't dive super into here, and then some examples. So this is objectives and key results sections are tied to each other. So you can see what are some example objectives and then key results that are tied to those, which could be a helpful deep dive. But from here, what I'm going to do is just add the key results from the objective view and then see if they show up in that bottom section. With launching a course, what I want to do prior to creating the course content is I want to make sure that I get, let's say, get 100 pre-launch signups. And then you'll notice it has the bullseye because we're in that objective view. But if I go in here and I just tag it as a key result, that's going to, should update this goal type. And then from here, I want to make sure I add some key metrics. So I'm going to add myself as an owner. This is related to training. And then the start, I'm starting with 0, the current is 0, and then the target is 100. So we've got that data. And then if I expand these properties, there's a few other things going on here, specifically the duration. So I want to say this is starting on the 1st and ending at the end of September. So this is going to, this means that it's showing up wherever there's a filter to only show active key results. So we've got that one. What I want to do from here, because we've gone through all the way from goals to key results, is see some of the views that are set up in the actual goals database to see how we might use this and how we might group this data in ways that are just easier to navigate. So if we go to that goals database, you'll notice there's roughly 7 views. and each of them are showing the same data in slightly different ways. The first view, which is a simple goals view, if I open up this filter, this is only showing key results. If you are thinking, okay, OKRs are way too complicated, I just want to set up 5 or 6 key results and I don't quite have the objectives figured out or the goals figured out, that's totally fine. And because we're working in the same database, you can do that. So in this case, we're only showing key results that are within the current quarter. And this view is where we're likely to update these metrics, say weekly or bi-weekly. So if we've got published 6 YouTube videos over the quarter, at the end of the week, if you're doing a weekly review, quickly updating this number and then seeing across the board, how are we performing across each of these key results. Couple other things to point out, because there's a few other tags here and I want to briefly touch on what they are. And this is also goes into detail in the guide that we're just in, but there's essentially 2 types of measures when it comes to key results. If we get into lead measures, what this means is this is a measure that's within our control. So if it's something that's launching, if it's things that are being published, things that are being created, those are kind of internal measures, which means that we're making them, we're creating things, and they're within our control. Lag measures are things that are external that we're working toward, but we have less control over. So if we think about social media following or number of signups for a course or web traffic, those are things that we're moving the needle on, but are ultimately external factors. So it's important to have a balance between lead and lag measures to make sure that you can make progress across both. Because if we have, for example, all lag measures, if we're making the wrong goals or making goals that are not fitting to our business, those might not move. And then we're stuck in this place where we're not quite sure where to go from there. So lead measures allow us to make progress on things that are within our control. And then, as I mentioned, the difficulty level, having a balance between standard key results and aspirational. And one thing to note in the formula, not to get into the details of this, but aspirational goals are measured slightly differently because they're stretch goals. So if you're 70% toward an aspirational goal, that's technically more valuable than 70% of a standard goal, right? So we want to make sure we account for that in the way that we're treating the green, yellow, red property. And then what I'm going to do is quickly run through some of the things that are happening in this views and then see if there's any questions to dive into. But if we get into the OKR view, this has everything nested automatically. So this is where we get the benefits of that nested view. And we've got a big goal. This is around content creation. So I'm just going to add this here and then apply it to these 3. So within that goal, there's this quarter's objective. And then within that objective, there's these key results. And from here, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what you want to see on each view, especially if we're looking at everything nested all together. So if we get into objectives, this is just showing a list of objectives. And I'm going to show the demo content because it's probably got more actual content in there. So let's go into this one so I could see all objectives by team, the parent goal that it's associated with. And this is when we're thinking about the start of a quarter. This view is pretty useful for defining objectives across teams. And then if we get to key results, this view is mostly we're updating our data, right? So at weekly or bi-weekly, we want to see where we're at across each of these metrics. And then this is the most active view throughout the quarter in terms of updating that data. And then if we get to KRs by team, if you're part of a larger team or you're running a bigger company, we can also group by team because we've got that relational database set up. So if I wanted to open marketing specifically, I could see the key results related to marketing. And then if, for example, I wanted to turn on that progress bar, I can go ahead and move that over here to see where we are when it comes to marketing initiatives. And then the last point is I tend to recommend having a view in each database that's just everything all together, like spreadsheet style, that allows you just to see every property turned on by default. to make more structural changes to the database if you need to. So in this case, we've got that nesting set up. We've got the duration for each key result. And then from here, I could scroll from left to right and see where things are at. If we, when, because we have number properties, there may be some things that you're tracking that are percentage related, or they are dollar amounts. And in which case, having a quick note as to what the units of those values are could be helpful, especially if you're part of a company or a team that may not know what is the unit of this number that we're tracking. And then that's all to say, this is probably 90% done as a template, but I figure I would just share it with you anyway. And this is also the basis for a course that we're going to be launching over the next probably 4 or 5 weeks that really goes into each step of the process, from that mission vision all the way down to the key results, and going a little bit further in terms of what does that weekly review look like when we're adding data, and how can that affect or be incorporated into what we're prioritizing when it comes to projects. I know there was a lot in there, but hopefully if you're new to OKRs, I definitely recommend diving a little bit deeper into the goal setup guide, because each section has just some more background information and some more examples that could be helpful, especially if you understand the kind of logic around the goal setting, but just benefit to see some examples there. And then the last thing when it comes to goal setting is, if I jump back into the main template, one kind of last piece of advice I'll leave you with is really just starting at the very minimum. What we want to do is have one objective for where do we want our business, our side hustle, our consulting agency, where do we want it to be in 3 months? What do we think is the highest priority area that's going to move us forward in that 3 month period? And then work backwards from there to define what are the things I could create, or the things I could focus on quantitatively to track my progress. And I think that's the area where, if we, for the clients that have implemented OKRs, it could take 2 or 3 quarters to get the right OKRs for their organization. And it's really just comes from fitting our goals into this framework and getting a sense of what we can actually accomplish in that 3 month period. So it is a very long-term kind of investment of getting it right. But I think the results are that we could know what to prioritize when it comes to projects. We could start to map out with more clarity what do the next 3 months look like, and go even further in terms of monthly planning and weekly planning, so that we know that the things that we're putting time and energy into are going toward moving the needle on those key results that we've set up to be the most important. If that was a lot and you want to do a recap, definitely going back to the setup guide to just go step by step, and starting from mission and vision, working our way into those goals, which don't have to be annual goals. They could be just long term in general. And then from there, getting more specific into that quarterly time frame in terms of where we want to be. So that's all I've got. I'll definitely share a link to the recording if you do want to watch a recap. But yeah, hope that was helpful, and hopefully we get to stay in touch. And I'll also share, as there's other premium templates or courses that get launched later in the year, I'll definitely share those with all of you in case you're interested.